lined up to watch, Harry, this peaceful transfer of power.
There is a buzz out here, Dan, and then there is an air of anticipation. Folks have been lining up out here. They're about 2 or 3 deep along the street. Folks from Pennsylvania, from Miami, Florida, from St. Louis, from all over the country come here to see the parade. I want to tell you a little bit about security. Just about an hour ago, some federal agents came by, looked in the manhole. When they decided it was safe, they spray painted it, and for all the rest of the security folks who are up and down along the street, they know that this area is particularly safe. And just a couple of minutes before that, the Navy folks came by, and about every 20 feet or so, there's a little piece of tape. And wherever there's a piece of tape, there's going to be a Navy sailor ready to keep watch here as the parade goes by. Dan?
Larry, interesting about those manhole covers, it's my recollection that the checking of the manhole covers began after the assassination of President Kennedy with the inaugural parade of President Johnson in 1964. At that time, they even tried to keep it secret that they were going to check all the manhole covers. But what a commentary on our times, Charles Kuralt, that for the first time in history today, every person who's within a certain number of yards of that stand back on the West Front where the swearing-in will take place must go through a personal metal detector.
Yeah, security strikes me as a very big problem on a day like this, because the public is invited, after all, to come see the swearing-in. You're right, people who are very close are going to have to pass a test, but I suppose tens of thousands of people will be out there in a little while, gazing all at the same place. I should think it would be a tough job for the security people.
Well, Bruce Morton is watching a whole different set of people. We've talked about Harry Smith being along the parade route with rank-and-file Americans who don't have to pay for standing room position in some places along the parade route. But Bruce, the folks who are going to be up close and personal for this swearing-in will have, in one way or the other, spent a lot of money getting there.
Well, a lot of them have, Dan, for sure. Not all of them, of course. The members of the U.S. Marine Band, which is struck up just behind me here, are, I suppose, getting paid, as they do every day, for making this cheerful noise. All of those people behind me in overcoats are the Mormon Tabernacle Choir, and we'll be hearing from them very shortly. There are also some members of the various military honor guards, which take one part or another in this ceremony, that have gathered here. And the crowd. You can see the paying guests. They're the ones in the roped-off sections with seats. And you can probably see some of the non-paying guests stretching on back down towards the Washington Monument. Lots of plain, ordinary people who will be a long way from the action, but have come here to watch it nevertheless. Dan?
Thanks, Bruce. And, boy, I hope we can get that shot up again, that long shot from the Capitol facing down the mall. There it is. Ah, I love that. Bob Schieffer, behind you, what we see is that really one of the great scenes of Washington. Just behind you there, you can't see it because you're facing us, the aircraft behind the Washington Monument. This is from the Capitol, looking, I want to check myself here, looking west, yes, looking west. And, Bob, if you don't mind a moment, we're going to throw it to you in a second. But I hear the music of This Land Is My Land. Let's just listen and watch for a moment or two here. The Mormon Tabernacle Choir. Mormon Tabernacle Choir segueing from This Land Is My Land right into Shenandoah and then into Dixie. And just about the time we got the instructions to say, well, we're going to have to move on and do our business, somebody decided, oh, come on, let's listen some more. We'll try to be doing a lot of that as the morning goes along. Now we'll go to Bob Sheeper. Bob, I hope you'll forgive us for delaying you there just a bit, but it's so wonderful to hear the Mormon Tabernacle Choir there. Bob has maybe got the best spot. Deputy Dog, I think you've got the best position there of anybody all day long, with the west front of the Capitol looking down on where the swearing-in will take place, and with that tremendous view behind you of the Washington Monument, and just behind that, the beautiful Jefferson Memorial, and on behind that, Arlington National Cemetery and the lasting flame in memory of John F. Kennedy.
Well, I was going to say, Dan, if there's a better place to do this, a better place to swear in a president, I can't think where it would be, because that view looking down the mall is the view that George Bush will have when he takes the oath and as he makes his inaugural address. And for those of us who live here in Washington have always been convinced that it's the prettiest city in the world. And I think as you look out across Washington today, it is really at its winter's time best. And the weather is just spectacular. If it gets any warmer, they may plant some banana trees around here. It's just one of the great winter days in Washington history, or at least in the last 20 years that I've been around here. So everything is all set, and it couldn't be prettier.
Well, as the crowd begins to gather, and for those of you who know Washington, you know this, but for others, try to set you on the scene. This is a shot from virtually atop the Capitol Dome of the Washington Monument, directly behind the Washington Monument, the Lincoln Memorial, where so much has happened, including Dr. Martin Luther King's I Have a Dream speech. Just off to the left, that building looks a little like a castle. Off to your left, as you look at the Washington Monument, is the original Smithsonian building, one of my own personal favorites in the Capitol. And in the foreground of the shot, this is a pullback, the great mall that Pierre Buffon, who laid out Washington, the Frenchman who's buried at Arlington National Cemetery, laid out Washington for George Washington. What a job he did. But as you get this pullback shot, you'll see in the foreground, which is, say, at the bottom of your screen, you can just begin to see it now. In front of that reflecting pool, the statue of Ulysses S. Grant, the memorial to the Union soldiers of the Civil War. You'll be seeing this kind of thing all day long as part of our coverage. There's Grant with his hat pulled down over his head. You can almost feel the rain as the sculptor tried to make it Grant in the rain with his troops. You can almost see and feel the rain on the top of old General Grant's hat there. Well, when we come back, we will be listening to an interview with Barbara Bush, the new First Lady-to-be. So, Dan Rather with Charles Kuralt. We have plenty just ahead for you. We hope you stay here with us.
Betty and I wish Barbara and you our very, very best. We know you'll do a good job. Good luck, and God bless you.
Back at our CBS News anchor booth, thanks to the AFL-CIO Carpenters and Joiners Union. They've arranged for us to have this space. Looking back the Capitol that direction, we'll be able to see the parade this afternoon off in there, be here all day covering it for you. The center of attention, of course, as it should be, the new president. But our country is also getting a new First Lady, a position that, as we know, can hold enormous influence. I paid a visit last week to Barbara Bush at her home for the past 8 years, the official vice presidential residence that's on the grounds of the old U.S. Naval Observatory here in Washington. This is the house that the Quayles will be moving into. When we were visiting with Barbara Bush there, we talked about her new role at the White House and about the role she's played for more than 40 years now, full partner in marriage with George Bush. And I asked Mrs. Bush about reports that she, in some ways, is more middle of the road, maybe even liberal than her husband on such issues as abortion and the Equal Rights Amendment.
I have never talked about what I feel about issues. When I get elected to public office, I'm going to stand up and tell you all. And then I hope George will back me, too, because that isn't important. It's what George thinks that counts. And I've gotten into the midst of this horrible game now, and I'm not going to get out of it. I'm just going to stick with that same answer.
Child care. Have you talked to George Bush about child care?
Well, yes, and he's talked to me about it, too. I think he's got a very good program for child care.
When you talk about it, what do you emphasize to him? Clearly, you've been talking about this for years.
Well, actually, I don't lecture George. He has lots of experts and lots of women experts on the subject of daycare, so I listen to some of their solutions and some of their thoughts, and I really don't lecture him, Dan. You know, that's how you stay happily married for 44 years. I suspect Jean doesn't lecture you too much, too.
No, she gets her points in, but not with lectures. When you think about recent first ladies, Pat Nixon, Betty Ford, Rosalind Carter,
Lady Bird,
Lady Bird Johnson, Nancy Reagan. As you run down that list, which one do you think you might be closest to in terms of style and approach to being First Lady?
You left out one that I read that I was most like, and actually I like a lot. I like Bess Truman. I don't think I'll be like her, but I like the fact that she did her own thing, and she made Harry happy. I'd like to make George happy, and I'd like to do my own thing, and I'd like to do a lot of other things, too.
How about entertaining style? The Reagans have had a distinctive and very popular entertaining style. Someone said to me, listen, Barbara Bush knows elegance and knows how to be elegant, but you can expect from the Bushes as a general pattern that there'll be a better generational mix of people at the White House, and that they'll do barbecues and spuds as well as the best of nouveau cuisine. Is that pretty much on the mark?
We will have our children and their friends over, and our friends and their children over. We've done that every Sunday of our married life, and we're not going to change on that. But when we officially entertain, you don't have to hold your breath, everybody. We're going to have wonderful food and beautiful flowers, and you're going to be very proud of the White House. But am I going to be able to change George Bush? No, and he's still going to ask people over at the last minute. And I saw his eyes sparkle last night when he saw 40 people upstairs at the White House, and I could see him thinking, I can do this every night. I mean,
you and your husband worked so hard, so long, hoped for so long to get where you're about to be, where you are now. Was there a moment, there must have been a moment, where you said to yourselves, "Phew, boy, we did it"?
Of course, election night, we sort of turned and said, you know, it really happened. You did win. But I find myself, Dan, every now and then saying to George, you know, you really are going to be president. I mean, funny things happen. And I was, my gosh, he really is going to be president. I still not sure I quite understand it, but he's going to be the best president, and he deserves it. He's a good, strong, decent man.
Barbara Bush, thank you very much.
You know, they talk about George Bush being perhaps as well prepared for the American presidency on the basis of experience as anyone we've ever had come into the office. Charles Draw, strikes me that Barbara Bush, who's been right there at his side all these years, is perhaps one of the better prepared women to become First Lady. She's so comfortable with herself and has that marvelous ability, I wish I had it, to make everyone with whom she comes in contact feel comfortable as well.
Yeah, she seems very likable. I was fascinated by the fact that after you had ticked off the names of all the First Ladies who undoubtedly gave advice to their husbands, she went straight to the name of the one First Lady who undoubtedly did not, Bess Truman. I suspect that she's going to be a more activist First Lady than Bess Truman was.
She if that's true, I believe you could bet the ranch that she'll keep it very quiet. You're not likely to be reading in the newspapers that Barbara Bush has suggested that to George Bush that you do this, that, or the other. That she spent a lifetime being a tomb of silence and that sort of thing, and I reckon she'll continue to be. When we come back, George Bush and Dan Quayle will be getting ready to cross the street to the White House to go over to visit with the outgoing president. So stay here with us, won't you?
moving toward the moments where Dan Quayle will be sworn in as our new vice president and George Bush is our new president back there on the east front of the White House, building toward that moment now. Wyatt Andrews, our State Department correspondent, is outside Blair House, where the Bushes and the Quayles have been since they came back from church. And Wyatt, I'm told that you've got a little news, so we're glad to hear it. What is the news?
Well, Dan, a number of things have happened in the last hour or so. Bush had about 45 minutes off, and he apparently got a national security briefing from the National Security Advisor designate, Brent Scowcroft. He didn't tell us that, but I presume that Scowcroft didn't come here for nothing. That took about 15 minutes. Then I should tell you, Dan, he invited all of us who are out here on this stakeout in. That includes 3 correspondents and about 15 technicians. It was an off-the-record, very nice conversation. He just said, I've got some time to kill. Why don't you all come in and get warm? Here now is the President-elect of the United States making his way. The limos are on here, Dan, but he could literally walk. The White House isn't 200 yards from here. And we're not sure exactly whether he's going to walk or ride, but we'll find out right now. Vice President-elect Dan Quayle is with him. Let's see if we can get a question. What's the theme, Mr. Vice President? What's the theme of today? Continuity plus, I believe, is what he said, Dan.
Continuity plus, the theme of the day. I thought he also said, and watch there, Wyatt. You know, he's kept this, his inaugural address pretty much under wraps, other than to say it would hit broad themes and not so much on specifics.
You're probably right. You probably heard that better than I did. But he apparently is going to ride this 200 yards.
Now, we've been, and the Quayles are riding in there with him. Dan Quayle, Marilyn Quayle, George and Barbara Bush. They'll be riding in one of the fleet of vice presidential limousines. This is not the brand new Lincoln you've heard so much about, and we'll be telling you about as the day goes along. But more about the automobiles perhaps a little later in the day, other than to simply point out now that the Bushes and the Quayles are going to ride the short distance over to the White House. Is literally across the street for, among other, I suspect, security reasons. Joining us now is Clement Conyers, former curator of the White House. Glad to have you with us this morning. Good to see and hear from you again. Now, they'll be meeting the Bushes, Quayles, and Reagans in the Blue Room downstairs in the White House.
Yes. The Blue Room today looks very much as it did when it was last redecorated in 1972 by Mrs. Nixon, and features, among other things, the character of a French drawing room in America at the time of President Monroe, because there's still some of the furniture, chairs, sofa, a clock, and so on, dating from Monroe's day in the room. But I think especially interesting to tourists is the fact that there are the portraits of the first 6 presidents in the room. George Washington by Rembrandt Peale, Adams by John Trumbull, Jefferson by Rembrandt Peale, Madison and by Vanderlyn, Monroe by Samuel F.B. Morse, the inventor of the telegraph.
Excuse me one moment, Conyers. As you can see here, I'm fascinated by what they'll be seeing inside the room, and that may be the reason they chose the Blue Room to meet in, because of all those portraits present. But as you can see, this is the North Portico of the White House. The always expressive face of First Lady Nancy Reagan. Hugs and kisses all the way around. It was said during the 1980 campaign that there was some friction between the Reagans and the Bushes, and why wouldn't they be? They were challengers for the presidency at that time, but over the years, some closeness has developed, particularly between the Reagans and the Bushes, and of late, President Reagan has gone out of his way to talk well about the Quayles. Let's see if we can pick up some of this sound. The President says, we've been packing.
George Bush looks utterly at ease on the morning of his big day, doesn't he, Dan?
He does look absolutely at ease and so happy, and why wouldn't he be? This is the North Portico of the White House. The South Portico, which you perhaps more often see, the so-called diplomatic entrance, is the direct opposite side of this. And
well, a lot of people consider this to be, Mr. Conyers, the front of the White House. It wasn't actually designed to be that way.
Well, originally, the main entrance to the White House was from the south lawn, up steps, and into the Blue Room. The Blue Room was then an entrance hall.
Now, this scene that we're seeing is from the very front of the White House, one of those lovely fountains from just inside the fence of the White House. If you were in the White House looking back, you would see Lafayette Square and that statue of Andrew Jackson on horseback we mentioned earlier, but we're looking toward the White House. This is the magnificent North Portico. And the Blue Room, as you look toward the White House, would be in the lower left-hand quadrant of the screen, sort of mid-lower left-hand quadrant.
In the middle, actually.
And fairly near the middle, right? And then right on through the house, in other words, on the other side.
That's right.
Of the White House. Well, as the Bushes and the Quayles have arrived at the White House to have a cup of coffee and a little chat with President and Mrs. Reagan, time for me to say that we'll be right back to talk to some former occupants of the White House on this inauguration day. That's straight ahead.
Dentists warn, the #1 dental problem isn't cavities. It isn't tartar. It's plaque, building up on your teeth every day. And no matter how much you brush, you don't get enough plaque off your teeth, especially in hard-to-reach places. The problem is plaque. The solution is Plaques. Rinse with Plaques before brushing, and you can remove 300% more plaque than brushing alone. Plaques, original flavor and soft mint, removes 300% more plaque than brushing alone.
In a place like this, what you bring with you is critical.
When 1,000 doctors were asked which one of these medicines they'd want along, the clear choice was Bayer.
I chose Bayer. Shouldn't you?
Bayer, the wonder drug that works wonders.
In home after home, people are throwing out cleaners they don't need, because all they need is Lysol Direct. Direct cleans everything without rinsing, so people are making room for one cleaner that cleans everything. Lysol Direct.
This dry skin itch, won't anything stop it fast?
Lanacane will. Lanacane shuts off the itch like a switch, instantly. Look, Vaseline Intensive Care can't. Jergens can't. These can't. Only Lanacane Cream quiets the itch nerves that cause dry skin itch, instantly, on contact, as it deep moisturizes to help heal rough, dry skin. For dry skin itch, every itch.
Lanacane does shut off the itch, like a switch, instantly. I need something for my sore throat. Here's a cough drop.
Why take a cough drop for a sore throat? Try Sucrets, the sore throat specialist. Sucrets has the medicine hexylresorcinol. Cough drops don't.
Sucrets.
For sore throat relief, get Sucrets, the sore throat specialist.
Got a nice minty taste to it.
That's good.
Can you say that about your liquid antacid? If not, taste new Tums Liquid.
It has a nice taste to it. It's delicious. Tums tastes the best.
New Tums Liquid. It works, and it really tastes good.
I'm a bit worried about the Baron spending that money to bring those Yanks down under to learn how to talk to the Dolphins. The Dolphins been talking to my people for the last 40,000 years. G'day, mate. I reckon it's about time I went walkabout. No, not you guys.
The adventure begins Saturday at Dolphin Cove.
Now that's fair dinkum, mate.
This is CBS.
For many older people, the TV has become little more than a glorified radio. Nothing wrong with their sets, it's their eyesight. If your viewing's hazy and out of focus, it may not be your reception. You may have cataracts. Call the Cataract Institute for an exam. If you qualify, transportation is provided, and treatment is quick, safe, and even cost-free. Turn up the volume on your vision. You'll love your new viewing even after the set's turned off. I'm Dr. Kenneth Ray. For cost-free cataract surgery, call the Cataract Institute of Texas today.
You don't want to pay too much for a new Chevy car or truck, but if you go to a high-price Chevy dealer, you'll be going to the cleaners. Come to Landmark Chevrolet, the home of cheap prices. Landmark's the largest volume Chevy dealer in the state of Texas. Huge selection, huge savings, plus millions of dollars in cut-rate financing, an incredible 4.9% APR on every new car and truck. Houston, hey, you paid too much too long, so come to Landmark Chevrolet, the home of cheap prices, right here.
What makes something a dangerous drug?
if it makes people addicted.
More than 10 million Americans are addicted to alcohol. Remember, whether it's beer, wine coolers, or hard liquor, alcohol is a dangerous drug.
80 years young. 236-8377.
This is a CBS News special inauguration report. From the nation's capital, here again is Dan Rather.
And that picture looking toward the west front of the Capitol, just back there where the swearing-in will be taking place not too long from now, about an hour and 20 minutes. With us at our CBS News Inauguration Day anchor booth, and I'm pleased they are, Susan Ford and Chip Carter, the children of President Ford and President Carter. Susan, what's it like living in the White House?
It's wonderful. It's a fairy tale that very few people like Chip and myself ever get to experience, because it's a sorority you can't join. You just get put there. And it's unusual. It's very homey. You can make it as homey as you want. And I was living at home because I was in high school and college. But it's a wonderful, wonderful experience.
Well, Chip, Will Rogers said, and I quote him directly here, no president can be himself. They're eating and sleeping in a show window. They are acting every minute. Does that apply to the children as well?
It does. It does. Everything you do is minutely looked at by the press. And, you know, I think you try to live up to the expectations of the American people have of a first family, and it changes you a good bit, I think.
Susan, you were at an age where you were beginning to date. Was that a problem for you, the Secret Service problem? How does that work?
You make it as much of a problem as you want it to be. I had the advantage over my brothers where dates would pick me up and I would go in the car with my date and the agents would follow. My brothers would come home from college and not have a car at home because they left it at school, and they'd have to ride with the agents in the agent's car with their date. So, I mean, it all worked out. It was one of these where if you didn't want to worry about parking wherever you're going, you rode with the agents. So you can work it out. You just don't make it that bad.
Chip, there must have been those occasions when your father, as fathers are prone to do.
I guess the walk, when our family walked down the street, I think it was really moving, and it was secret, and everybody was being surprised, and Walter Cronkite was standing on the side of the street saying, they're walking, they're walking, they're walking, as we walked by. It was really moving.
Now, Susan, you didn't have an inauguration day with your family since President Ford was sworn in after President Nixon resigned, but you're bound to have vivid memories of that swearing in the East Room. What one thing do you remember the most?
I think probably just standing there and watching my father, you know, say the words, and seeing my parents together as a team, as they always have been. And there was something more intimate about our swearing in. It took place in the East Room. It was a very limited amount of people that could be there. You don't have the hundreds of thousands of people that are standing out there on the streets. And it was a very close time. And my father decided that that was the way it was going to be. It was not a time for celebration and everything else, because it had not happened before.
Susan Ford, Chip Carter, thank you very much for being with us. Enjoy.
Thank you.
Well, George Bush will be setting the agenda for the nation for at least the next 4 years. That's the main thing he'll be trying to accomplish with his inaugural address today. George Bush and the First Lady may also be setting some trends as Americans size up and begin to adjust to a new, very different first family. Eric Ingberg takes a look now at the ins and outs of presidential style. Eric?
Dan, you have to remember, first of all, that Washington is a city of professional followers. Careers are made here by adroitly shifting to changes in the political wind direction. So it's no wonder that a new president with his personality and style quickly determines what's in and what's out.
Horseback riding is now out. Horseshoe pitching is in. George Bush has already done more to glamorize fishing than anyone since Ernest Hemingway. And racing around in a 28-foot super-powered cigarette boat is sure to be the next in pursuit. Brown suits are out. Blue blazers are in. Texas is in. Maine is in. Massachusetts is out. Again.
During the campaign, Mr. Bush tried to soften his patrician image by letting on that he liked pork rinds, a deep-fried favorite of real and would-be rednecks. Predictably, demand soared.
Well, I have noticed that when they're served with dips at cocktail parties and what have you, you look around, the first bowl to be empty is a bacon rind bowl.
Great communicating is out. In fact, Mr. Bush seems to enjoy being spoofed for his linguistic fumbles.
Try to remember that date in September. The day Japan attacked Pearl Harbor.
Instead of smooth performance, the Bush style is self-deprecation.
He is a relaxed guy. He has a nice self-effacing sense of humor. Then again, some people say he has a lot to self-efface.
For her part, Barbara Bush is making rejection of fashion fashionable by laughing away all talk of losing weight, dyeing her hair, or borrowing designer togs.
I think she's going to be a role model for people like me. With the beads and the gray hair.
Barbara fashion tends toward no-frill sensibility, like the fake triple-strand pearls, which are now the rage in trendy New York shops. The new president wakes up in the morning to the sounds of Washington's one country station. He's one of many touched by country music's down-home themes.
Cheating, drinking, mama, trains. We didn't know George was into all that, did we?
Bush, who loves to go out to Chinese restaurants, has vowed not to be trapped in the splendid isolation of the White House.
George is going to be everywhere. You know, where was George? Watch, everywhere.
The Bushes are such Washington insiders that their elevation to the top of the political heap has been treated by Washington's establishment something like a routine promotion inside a big company.
They know how it all works in those areas of government, from being in the diplomatic corps to being overseeing the spies.
So, as Washington tosses its collective supply of jelly beans into the ash can, something else that's in again is being in the government in Washington. Eric Engberg, CBS News, Washington.
Where we're told, and this is what passes for news as we begin to build up to the swearing in, that they're now changing the license plates on the president's new car. Oh, we have a picture of it here. Now, this is this Lincoln. $600,000 plus of an automobile that includes, we're told, we don't make these things up, we're told, bullet-resistant tires, completely bomb-resistant material underneath the automobile, and they apparently aren't kidding about this, that the president from this new Lincoln, this will replace the standard Cadillac that President Reagan has been moving around in, that from this automobile, the president can literally hit the nuclear button, God forbid if he should ever have to do so. Charles Garrell, I don't know what happens if it happens to be in a tunnel or going under an overpass at the time he tries to do that.
Every owner of every truck driver with a CB knows the answer to that. You just drive to the top of the hill and transmit from there.
I know somebody said we shouldn't be joking about such things, but how can you not? That the oversized windows in the rear of the car, their interior lights to illuminate the occupants at night or on overcast days. I remember that President Johnson had speakers built into the car so he could sit in the back of the presidential limousine and say, this is your president speaking to you, and I think it has that capability as well.
Transportation counts, but we shouldn't forget that when he was inaugurated, President Jefferson rode a horse, so that probably worked fine, too.
Well, you know, interesting, we may get a chance to talk as the day goes along, that presidents didn't ride in the inaugural parade in automobiles until the 1920s. That Mr. Collins, our historian here, is telling me that Harding really was the first, Harding, if you will, in the 1920s, before it was the style, we're speaking of style, Eric Engberg, to ride in these inaugural parades. It reminds you how fast time travels and what a still young country we are. The first president to ride on his inauguration ceremony in a car was Warren Harding in 1921, having gone through the 1920 election.
That was also the first inauguration anybody could hear, because it was the first time they used loudspeakers.
Well, Bruce Morton is on Capitol Hill, where there are a lot of loudspeakers today. Bruce, the crowd are growing there as people get through, for the first time in our history, the metal detectors in order to be able to take their seats for the swearing-in ceremony.
Crowds are growing, Dan. The Mormon Tabernacle Choir has moved out of the seats just behind me, and the VIPs have started to arrive. We noticed the Reverend Jesse Jackson come in a few minutes ago, and another prominent minister, the Reverend Jerry Falwell, both of them arriving. The Military Honor Guard, or one of the Military Honor Guards, has started to form up. And the plain people are coming, all stretching down out of the mall. You can see people, those who've paid in the seats, those who haven't, standing, some of them even on the far side of the reflecting pool, behind the statue of General Grant you talked about earlier. So there is a very large crowd forming here. They sent out 140,000 invitations. I have absolutely no idea how many people are out there, Dan, but it's a really good crowd. A lot of people here under what have become gray skies now, waiting for the magic moment at noon.
Well, the sky's graying up a little bit, Bruce, and the wind has died down a bit. We'll have to see how the afternoon develops. We're certainly hoping that whatever colder, windier weather we're going to get holds off at least until we get the parade in.
Well, speaking as an amateur weatherman, and I never did this even in local television, I don't think it's going to rain for a while yet. These clouds are high. They don't look as if showers were going to start anytime soon.
Well, with this beautiful picture of Washington on George Bush's Inauguration Day, time for me to say that we'll be right back to watch the Reagans and the Bushes leave the White House after these messages.
My advice to you, George, is let's really have a good time.
Cornflakes, simple, delicious, and surprising. Taste them again for the first time. And by General Motors, the mark of excellence.
Back here in Washington, D.C., about an hour and 10 minutes before George Bush will be sworn in as the 41st President of the United States. And right now, the Bushes, the Quayles, and the Reagans are in the gorgeous blue room of the White House with those portraits of some 8 previous presidents, some of them brooding, some of them smiling, hanging on the walls there, the blue room. Charles, here's, I guess you'd expect a former White House correspondent to say this, one of my favorite Washington views. This is looking from the Washington Monument, sort of, to the White House. This is on the south portico, the direct opposite side of the White House from where the Reagans greeted the Bushes and the Quayles a moment ago. And if you want to find the blue room here, just look sort of in the middle of your screen, slightly to the right on the first floor of the White House is where the blue room is, not far from the state dining room, which has that marvelous portrait of a brooding Lincoln. Well, Kathleen Sullivan is out on Pennsylvania Avenue, where Kathleen has gotten cloudier. I see you've got your Wayfarer sunglasses off this time, but the clouds so far haven't been putting on their thunderwear, but the wind is up and it's gotten a little colder.
You know, Dan, last time I was talking to you about a half hour ago, I had my sunglasses on and I had no realization of it at all because it was so bright and it was warm and everyone was hoping that it was going to be like 40, 50 degrees like yesterday.
Oh, we thought the glasses were terrific. They were bad glasses.
Well, you know, something's happened in the last half hour and there's a big chill. The cloud cover is a little bit thicker. Some of these people only started coming out. One of the helicopters going over to the White House area a block away. A lot of these people came out at about 8 o'clock this morning, and so there's all different kind of variety of dress wear. Some people are in light jackets, suits, some people in heavy overcoats, and you notice now in the last half hour people trying to get a little warmer, kind of bouncing up and down, including this. I want to show you now. These guys are all supposed to be at attention, standing straight up. There are 3 different groups of the armed services that George Bush is going to see on his way down Pennsylvania Avenue up to Capitol Hill. And you can see even the Marines kind of trying to get just a little movement in the legs, a little warmth down there because the chill is really on down.
Well, even in that at-ease position, which is what that is, it's difficult to stand out there for all those long hours in the cold. Kathleen, if we can get that shot back on you, we were talking a moment ago, that's it, pan back over to her, and just behind you, is a young man, perhaps you can turn, there he is, who has part of what they're trying to make the George Bush style. He has on what's known down south as a gimme cap.
Oh, you mean the cow? Which
That's
cap
right,
are you
the gimme
talking
cap.
about?
Now, George Bush is trying to popularize these gimme caps because, well, frankly, so many people wear them.
Well, let me see if this is where this guy got the fashion idea. Hi, what's your name?
Charles.
Where are you from?
From here in Washington, D.C.
How long have you been out here today?
About 45 minutes.
Now, Dan Rather has a conjecture. Are you wearing those hats now because it's in fashion in the Bush administration, or are you always a Cal Bear fan?
I've always been a Cal Bear fan. I just moved here about 11 months ago from Sacramento, California.
Well, California is definitely out of this parade. In fact, Dan, when I was looking at some of the inaugural rundown in the parade route, there are 10 contingents from Texas in this parade. There's only going to be one from California. It's the Sacramento County Sheriff's Posse Squad. So California is really on the outs here. I guess we're huddling together.
Well, Kathleen, there's been a lot of talk about the Texas cast to this particular administration because you have Jim Baker, the Secretary of State, and who'll be much more than in the Bush administration. You can bet John Tower, the new Secretary of Defense, Mosbacher in the cabinet. There's definitely a Texas cast to it, and Lloyd Benson, although defeated for Vice President, leader in the Senate, Jim Wright, the Speaker of the House. Reminds me that Will Rogers once said that Texas thought it would never live to see the day that it actually elected anybody out of the Republican Party, and now they're seemingly everywhere, at least seemingly to the Democrats. Kathleen, we want to get ourselves caught up on the weather a little bit. The weather today is a lot kinder and gentler than it was for some past inaugurations. And we're going to show you and let you listen to some talk about that as we go along this morning, because there have been some interesting things happen on bad weather days here in Washington. We have our fingers crossed that this does not develop into a bad weather day, even though the clouds are moving in and it's getting a little colder. But Ed Bradley won't have to worry about that since he's inside directly across from the presidential reviewing stand, and the reviewing stand itself is closed in, isn't it, Ed, partly for security reasons?
Yeah, part of it is closed in, Dan. We were just looking at there's some bulletproof glass around the part where the presidential party will be sitting right in front. We were trying to figure out if the overhang stuck out enough so that it would protect them if it does start to rain. Hopefully it's something we won't have to worry about. But there's protection on the side, but the front is open to the elements. So if there's rain and wind, I think somebody's going to get wet, but hopefully that won't happen.
Well, there's a real tradition of outgoing presidents attending their incoming successors' inauguration. It hasn't always been in something as elaborate as this viewing stand across the street. That seems to get more expensive and elaborate each inauguration. So I think there's a rather nice tradition of the outgoing president sticking around for the incoming president's inauguration.
There is, you know, it's not written down anywhere. It's not cast in stone, but it has become a tradition. And all living presidents, except 4 of them, have actually done it. The first not to do it was John Adams, who didn't attend Thomas Jefferson's inauguration. And it wasn't, there wasn't any bad blood between them. It's just that Adams felt that he was so overshadowed at his own inauguration by George Washington. So many people thought it was the last time they would see the father of our country, that he was tremendously overshadowed. So he thought the best thing for him to do was not to show up at Jefferson's. However, there were 2 others, John Quincy Adams and Andrew Jackson, and Andrew Johnson and Ulysses Grant, where there were bad feelings. In fact, Andrew Jackson did make the customary courtesy call on John Quincy Adams. So when it was time for his inauguration, Mr. Adams decided to take a horseback ride. And it wasn't to the inauguration, it was away from Washington. The same thing with Andrew Johnson and Ulysses Grant. There were hard feelings there. The only other living president not to attend the inauguration of his successor was Richard Nixon. For obvious reasons, he had resigned. His resignation was to take effect that noon. He was leaving the White House at that time in disgrace, going to San Clemente, California. So he wasn't around when Gerald Ford was sworn in as president.
Ed, you were mentioning sort of bad blood between Andrew Jackson and his predecessor, John Quincy Adams. One tends to forget that President John Quincy Adams came back and gave Andrew Jackson a hard time, principally over slavery, as a member of the House of Representatives.
I'd certainly forgotten it.
Well, why wouldn't we? It happened last century, but also these days, nobody even talks about a former president running for another office after he gets out of office. John Quincy Adams went back to Massachusetts, got elected to the House of Representatives, and an argument could be made served his country at least as importantly, perhaps even more so, as a member of the opposition to Andrew Jackson in the House of Representatives.
It'll be interesting to see what Ronald Reagan does. Certainly, he's not going to run for office, but I have the feeling he's not going to disappear from public view. I'm told that he and Mrs. Reagan are very anxious to get home. They feel that they've done what they came to do in Washington, and they can't wait to get back to California. But he's not going to ride off into the sunset. As he said, he's going to be on the chicken and mashed potato circuit. It'll be interesting to see what kind of public persona he has as a former president, actually going out with his own agenda with his successor in office.
What's going on right now is the Reagans, the Bushes, and the Quayles are inside the White House, in the Blue Room of the White House. This the entrance of the north portico. The Blue Room just off to center left there on the first floor. Charles Gerald, Ed makes a very good point. One doesn't expect Ronald Reagan just to go out there and rusticate on his ranch. He's already said he's going to be out speaking, which is what got him into politics to begin with. He made all those speeches on the chicken and mashed potato circuit, so now there's going to be some symmetry. He'll spend some of the latter years of his life doing that same thing as a former president.
Yeah, one imagines that he could do his successor a lot of good if he chooses to. He's going out on such a wave of personal popularity. George Bush bringing his own style to the presidency, and with different things to emphasize, no doubt. And if President Reagan chooses to be a part of his chorus, I'm sure the new president will be grateful.
Well, Terrence Smith is down on the lawn with the crowds looking up at the inaugural platform. Terry, I noticed that the flag on the top of the White House is almost left now, which tells me the wind has died down, but the temperature is dropping.
Well, it's actually just fine here, Charles. It is a little gray, a little cooler than it was before, but it's a fine day. I'm down here among the invited guests, some 26,000 of them seated here on the west front of the Capitol. Let me introduce you to two of them. This is Mike Deegan and Melody Thompson, who are from Fort Worth, Texas. Tell us, Mike, how you managed to get here.
We got here, I guess, by the grace of our Congressman, Mr. Wright. We called his office, and we could get
Terry,
some tickets,
excuse
and
me,
he got
we're going to
some
have to interrupt you for a moment. I really hate to do so, particularly with a fellow from Fort Worth in a nice hat like that, but the Reagans are going to say goodbye now to President-elect Bush and Mrs. Bush, as well as the Quayles, and enter the limousine for the trip up here to Capitol Hill. When I say goodbye, what I should say is escort them out of the White House, because as we've mentioned earlier, that they'll be riding together up to Capitol Hill. The Reagans and the Bushes. They'll ride in one of the Cadillac limousines from the White House to the Capitol for the swearing in. Now, having been caught before in confusion about which car they're riding in, we'll be watching closely, Charles, to see whether they're in that brand new Lincoln, or whether they stay in the old presidential limousine until George Bush is sworn in. What will happen now? They're going to be in this car, come up to Capitol Hill, short ride up Pennsylvania Avenue from the driveway in front of the north portico of the White House. The last ride as President of the United States for Ronald Reagan, and the ride to glory for George Bush. Charles?
I'm sure it's going to be a friendly ride. You and Ed Bradley were talking about it earlier. It's true that Hoover and Roosevelt rode together, for example, but you can imagine the icy atmosphere in that car, or just 8 years ago today when Jimmy Carter, disappointed by events of recent months, rode with Ronald Reagan to his inauguration. What's going on in that car is undoubtedly entirely warm and friendly.
You know, Dan,
Ed Bradley.
There have been some, they all haven't been that friendly, as Charles has pointed out. I remember reading in Harry Truman's oral memoirs, he was talking about the ride he had with Dwight Eisenhower, who was upset because his son, John, who was a colonel in the Army, had been brought back for the inauguration. He was serving at that time in Korea. And he said rather testily, who is responsible for bringing my son back? And Truman looked at him and said, I am. That was the end of the conversation. Ike, obviously, as an old general, recognized that Truman was still the commander-in-chief.
Well, Truman had tried to make that point with General Dugout Doug MacArthur had made it rather forcefully during the Korean War, but that was generally applauded at the time. I think President Truman bringing President Eisenhower's son back to Korea to see his father sworn in as president. This is the presidential motorcade, which is leaving the general area where Ed Bradley is, passing in front of that reviewing stand, from which Ed is across the street. Go down Pennsylvania Avenue, the wide avenue laid out by Pierre Laffont, up to Capitol Hill, the Reagans and the Bushes riding together. The Marilyn and Dan Quayle on their way as well. Quayle to be the first Indianan to be vice president since Democrat Thomas Marshall served Woodrow Wilson from 1913 to 1921. Now, there's military posted along with a mixture of police all along this motorcade route. As you see, the license plate, USA 1. Old Glory on the right fender, and the flag with the seal of the presidency of the United States on the left. Passing through Washington, as we say, the cloud cover has gotten denser in the last hour and a half or 2 hours. The wind has died down some. The temperature is dropping a little. Things still look good for the parade this afternoon, and we'll hope they stay that way because some elements of the parade, of course, are already beginning to move into what we might call a fallback position. They'll move much closer to the Capitol after the swearing in, which is to take place within this hour. Kathleen Sullivan is along the route, the motorcade route on Pennsylvania Avenue. Are they in sight yet, Kathleen?
Yeah, Dan, they really aren't in sight, and it's funny because a lot of people have seen so many police cars go up and down this morning. I don't think they really know that the President of the United States and the President-elect are actually coming down right now. There's just a couple people running, but the cold and the blistery weather has forced just a little bit more people inside than were expected.
Kathleen and Charles Peralta, I was interested to hear Mr. Collins, our Smithsonian historian on the subject, say that as best he can make out, President McKinley was the first American president to actually ride in an automobile. He did so sometime in the late 1800s, but he did not ride in any car during his inauguration.
The first to ride, though of course they were riding in a horse-drawn carriage, were Andrew Jackson and this vice president George Bush keeps bringing up, Martin Van Buren, the last sitting vice president to be elected president, as Mr. Bush was. They rode together to the Capitol in 1837, the first president and president-elect to make this historic trip, which we're watching now.
What a sight this is. This is the motorcade coming up Pennsylvania Avenue, great avenue that runs between the White House and the Capitol. In limousine number 1 are the president and the president-elect, President Reagan and President-elect George Bush. Just behind them, not immediately behind them, there are, well, not now. I started to say there was a Secret Service car in between, but now, immediately behind them in car number 2, Barbara Bush and still First Lady Nancy Reagan, not to be First Lady for much longer, but still First Lady. And in car number 3, Dan and Marilyn Quayle. Now, that's the motorcade. Let's just watch and listen here for the moment. We may be able to pick up some of that music in the background. Harry Smith, I know you can hear the music and have a wonderful view of this great scene of the peaceful transfer and transition of power beginning toward the Capitol.
Dan, the limousine just went by, and we could see George Bush and Ronald Reagan waving from the limousine. And I'll tell you, the electricity along here on Pennsylvania Avenue is really palpable. Folks have been sitting out here for hours, really shivering, and I could feel a real sense of warmth to just ride right by.
Harry, let's just watch and listen as the U.S. Army Field Band playing for us here at CBS, playing Hail to the Spirit of Liberty, as the motorcade goes up Pennsylvania Avenue. you want to hum along with us, feel free. As Charles and I were doing a little foot tapping to this U.S. Army Field Band music as the motorcade rolls up Pennsylvania Avenue. Symbolically, and this is the traditional way these things are done, riding with President Reagan and President-elect George Bush in the first limousine, the one you see just making the turn there toward the Capitol, are Senator Wendell Ford of Kentucky and the Speaker of the House, Jim Wright of Texas. Wendell Ford, who's in charge of the inauguration ceremonies for the Congress, riding in the first limousine. In the second car, Barbara Bush and Nancy Reagan, along with Senator George Mitchell and Representative Bob Michael. Bob Michael, the minority leader in the House of Representatives, and George Mitchell, also with the Congressional Committee responsible for the inauguration ceremonies at the Capitol. In the Quayle's limousine, that would be limousine number 3, Senator Ted Stevens of Alaska and Representative Tom Foley from the state of Washington.
Democrats get to ride in this parade. It's not all Republicans. The reason is that the Congress is responsible for the inaugural ceremony. The Supreme Court is represented, of course, by the Chief Justice, who does the swearing-in jobs, and the executive branch is much in evidence, but this is a country of 3 government branches, and it's the Congress's job to be sure that the president gets sworn in a timely way.
Well, they're practically on the Capitol grounds now, making the turn from away from the Senate office building, which is in the upper left-hand corner of your screen, and now onto the east front of the Capitol. This is the opposite side of the Capitol from where the swearing-in will take place. In terms of television pictures, maybe a little better known side of the Capitol, since we're accustomed to seeing dignitaries come and go from this east front of the Capitol. Now, from this east front, keep your eye peeled as the rest of the motorcade begins to pull in. From the east front, looking out from it, you can see the Supreme Court of the United States, which is a long baseball or rock throw away from this area. Phil Jones, our veteran CBS News Capitol Hill correspondent, is outside the Capitol, where the motorcade is just pulling in and pulling out. Phil?
Dan, they're pulling up right here at what is called the Law Library door. And they will get out of the limousines and go just a few steps inside into a holding room. For Ronald Reagan, this will be his last trip to the Capitol as President of the United States. Probably he won't miss that too much. In the 8 years that he has been living at 1600 Pennsylvania Avenue, he hasn't made too many trips here. Of course, he has come for the State of the Union messages each year. And other trips, probably half a dozen or so. Many people here believe that he could have done a whole lot more, could have had a closer relationship with members of Congress than he has. And in many instances, they felt that he really didn't try to work with them, that when he did come up here, it was for all of the fanfare and the ceremony, and that he was actually coming to...
Any last thoughts for us today? Any last thoughts today? President-elect Bush, any last thoughts for us?
Well, I tell you, he probably won't miss that when he leaves Washington, D.C. Some last time, reporters yelling questions at him as he goes in. As I was saying, you know, especially the Democrats felt that he really didn't ever come up here to consult with them. He would always come up after he had made up his mind on what he was going to do on some controversial issue and to tell them about it. For George Bush, this will be the final check-in before he walks across the Capitol to the West Front for the swearing-in ceremony.
And as the Reagans and the Bushes and the Quayles began to move into that holding room, wonderful picture of a smiling Dan Quayle and Mrs. Quayle. They'll be joining the Bushes and the Reagan in that small holding room near the east front of the Capitol, preparing for the moment not too far away now when the swearing-in ceremonies will take place. And while they do that, we're going to take a break for these messages and be back with you in just a few moments.
static, please.